and they both have registries, and those registries exist, and they just use those.
Right now, we're two different registries, right?
JWT and CDPR is at two different registries, yes.
I mean, you in the front end, you have to define a claim for JWT and a claim for case that are expensive. It's that the same information in two different registries.
But I don't want to register claims. I want to register data.
And then you can't get interoperability.
No, I
If
think
you don't register claim IDs, then you can't get interoperability.
Yeah, no, you need, the claim data types need to be defined in the document. I think that's not a registry.
The data types, yeah.
Yeah, types go in a document, and it's.
They say that too, right?
Yeah.
All data types, integer, string, you know,
But the
data.
instances of them, this is the data, this is my.
Yeah, yeah. I do think we have profiles under the ability to allocate exact claim IDs.
So we're gonna have a registry, we're gonna have a claims registry. Here's birthday,
Could be
4 days, here's happy day, there's a, there's a device boot date.
Here's a standard set, and here's how you can do vendor extensibility if you want to do standard.
Yeah.
Explicit, I mean, that's not a problem, because that registry's gonna be huge, and it's probably gonna grow.
Why is that a problem? I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I'm saying that's what the case is. Our court numbers now.
It's a cost.
The JWT registries already. How else can you do it? How else can
It's
you
only,
get around?
whether it's a cost then depends on
Because
what policy we put on.
So here's what I think we should do, I think that we should define profile and register those as a dictionary. And
So
sets of
That's your record.
And
That's not.
And that reduces my thing. So I can have a common dictionary of claims, right? And then when I do a data model, I'll register maybe the 4 or 5 additional claims that are associated with this profile.
Yeah.
And that profile, and so I don't need,
Well, that is yours.
but I don't need.
Yeah. The question is, do you want to, in your IETF policy, do you want to allow claims that are vendor extensible claims? And where you come to IETF and you say, I would like this Intel specific one because it only applies to anybody else. My expectation is yes. You tell me no, you'll never want that as Intel, that would be different.
So
But I'm expecting Intel would say, I would like Intel specific one.
There's one spec, right? There's one spec for
this,
As
so
long as there's a policy or a somewhere about what the IETF, then what will happen is there'll be individual ones, all your concerns about that, because they'll just, they'll come to IETF profiles.
what I did not speak.
Because that's our court numbers, I have types work right now, I'm a designated expert, I get those for IETF types right now. Interface stuff, Ethernet and, Wi-Fi and all these numbers, like 400.
But I didn't take it seriously that if I.
I'm just saying, I took myself.
I didn't take it seriously.
I get every request for an
I don't know.
A lot of them come from other entities.
I don't just use them, I'm saying
He's
trying
he's
to find
sitting in his
this,
room, right?
Will there be someone who will come and say.
Using the Chromebook?
It's just there.
Using the Chromebook, right?
Because it's not extensible, it's not a fee, I think. And I think really that you have something so.
Well, it's not showing up with the details either, which is the problem. I mean, so the problem must be here upstairs. The thing that shows there is the same, that's so.
It makes it harder to build services.
So I disagree with the first two, I may agree with the first. The first one, I disagree with because I am a designated expert, so I know how much it is, and if you're saying it's not manageable, I believe that there will be more IF types than claim numbers here, or approximately same order of magnitude. I believe that the order of, you say court numbers, I believe that about 2 orders of magnitude larger than
So if Microsoft gives you, so if Microsoft gives you a great phone this way,
Yeah, I was hoping he would show up before I start.
Oh, you're checking out your.
I assume.
I mean, we rest some of this.
So this is the RMCAT session. Are you all here for RMCAT? If not, you're in the wrong room. Okay.
You shouldn't say these things in jest now. Yeah.
So we're having some technical problems, but we hope we will get the slides online here in a minute. I guess we can. The issue is that they don't show up. And Jonathan. No, they are not showing up there either.
There either, okay.
So this is the problem. No, we have a technical problem. Yeah, evidently there's some. So we will need a Jabber scribe and a minute taker, please. Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have someone who can take the minutes as well? It should not be too difficult. Thank you. Ooh.
Okay, it's on the video.
Okay, perfect.
Click on the mirror index, try and type it again. Yeah, loose cable. One of these plugged into this box down here.
Okay, good. So then, welcome everyone to the RMCAT session. Now we also have slides to view, so this is good. So let's get started. This is the note well. I think by now you are all familiar with it. It guides the procedures for the meeting. So if you are not familiar with it, then please read it. We have now a Jabber scribe and minute taker, so thank you for this. This is the agenda for today. We will start by going over the status for the working group, the different documents. Then we have a presentation on NADA, some updates on the draft and some evaluation results. And Xiaojing will give this presentation remotely. And then Colin is going to give an update on the RTCP feedback work and if there are any other items that anyone wants to bring up. So let's start with the overview of the status. So we are finishing up most of our documents. So for the algorithms, congestion control algorithms, two of them were already RFCs before the meeting, and we have NADA that was submitted to the IESG, and it got some review from Miria and the AD review, and the authors have updated the draft after that, so we have this on the agenda for today, and then it will go back, of course, and continue the process. Then we have the coupled congestion control draft, which was in the RFC editor's queue when there was some we detected the optimization for using the bandwidth fully, so we took this draft back to the working group. The authors have updated it, and it was with the shares for review in the last meeting that has been completed, and we just now need the final document from the authors before it goes back to Mirja. So Shafiqul, who is the first author on the draft, has been on parental leave, so he's coming back in August, and then we will have the updated version, and then Mirja will have a look and decide what needs to be done with it for it to go back into the queue. And of course, the GCC congestion control was a draft that we don't expect that it will continue. Then we have the various documents. We have the requirements draft that is in the RFC editor queue, and there is now hopes that this whole bundle will be resolved quite soon. So probably this draft will finally move on to RFC. We have the different evaluation drafts, and one of them now became an RFC, the RFC 8593, the video traffic model. And the eval test draft is in the RFC editor queue, also waiting for the requirements draft to finish up. Because yes, so it hopefully will come out when the same bundle resolves. And then we have the eval criteria and the wireless test that went through the working group last call, and the authors just submitted up the final updates on both of those two drafts. So they are now with the shares for the write-up and sending it off. And then we have the feedback part. So Colin will give us an update on the draft in AVT Core, and then we have the draft in RMCAT that will be updated once the AVT Core draft gets finished. And we have some of the old other drafts that we don't expect to move on at this point. Our milestones, so the evaluation criteria and those drafts are being submitted, so we still need to finish up the final ones. Then we had some milestones related to the evaluation results and how to proceed beyond the experimental part. So we have some presentations today on the evaluations, and then at some point we need to figure out how to proceed here, if we will continue moving drafts on to the proposed standard track, or if they will end up as the experimental draft, depending on the interest and needs. Okay, so that completes the overview.
Hi, so should I get started?
Yes, let's see if I think, yes, now you should be able to have the drafts up. Yes, please go ahead, Xiaojing. You're up next with Renata.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm hoping the audio goes through okay, just to double check first.
Fine, thank you.
Great. So yeah, so this will be, I'm giving an update on NADA, both on the draft as well as on some updated implementation and evaluation results in integrating it in the open source Mozilla browser, still in the development branch. Next slide, please. So first, the update on the draft is that recently we got the AD review from Mirja. Thanks for that. And on the draft, she raised a collection of questions as well as some editorial suggestions. And I pushed the updated version, version 11 now, to the basically uploaded the draft this morning. And then I wanted to summarize the changes here. These changes were also summarized in sort of my email response to Mirja before the edit. So first off, the question was around the kind of the impact of how the rate adjustment on the rate shaping buffer size influences target video encoding rate as well as the sending rate. So Mirja raised some good points, some concerns about what if the video encoder, for instance, is an irresponsive one, then what if the rate shaping buffer builds up to an outrageous size? Would that basically become counterproductive with respect to the actual rate we want to send over to the network. So based on those concerns, I've both carried out some simulation-based results that I will show later, as well as some additional sort of caveat noting and text in the current draft. So we added discussion to show that the typical rate changes introduced by a rate shaping buffer in a normal scenario is on the order of tens of kilobits per second. We added one example of calculation in the draft, assuming 2,000 bytes of a rate shaping buffer. I've run some simulations and see that most of the time the rate shaping buffer is empty because the is being fairly responsive, and once in a while, if there's the generation of an iframe, so there is an instantaneous sort of a big frame in transit in the rate shaping buffer, and the size is between sort of 2,000 to 4,000 bytes, typical to an iframe. So that's where the numbers come from. And the simulation results that I'll show later will kind of show the impact of the rate shaping buffer when we use the recommended parameters. And the corresponding code changes have also been pushed to our open source repo for this one on GitHub. Now, secondly, to address the concern in the presence of a not so cooperative video encoder, we added some bounding conditions, some bounding logic, just to bound the rate change introduced by this mechanism, noting that this is a mechanism that's kind of optional because it depends on whether the rate shaping buffer information is available or not in the sender implementation. So it's outside of the core congestion control modular. So we added some bounding conditions both on the size of the absolute as a percentage of the reference rate, as well as bounding the final rate decisions within its original range, the minimum and the max. So all these text changes are now in the version 11 of the draft. And in addition, as I mentioned, this is an optional feature, not the core congestion control modular. The second point raised by the AD review was to add text on the security considerations. So we did that, and I'll be flashing out the security consideration text in the next page. And finally, there were some editorial suggestions. We incorporated all of them in the draft. I see Mira up front, so there's a question. Go ahead.
Yes, Mia. I didn't notice that this is optional. Can you explain why it's optional?
Optional in the sense that, so this implementation is not in the congestion control modular, but rather in the sender modular. So in the draft, we have a diagram showing that it basically revises the rate calculation from the congestion control modular, but modulates the sending. The reason why it's is that this rate shaping buffer information may or may not be exposed to the, let's say, to the developer. So for instance, in our NS3 simulation, we added the implementation of the rate shaping buffer, but then in our implementation of the Mozilla code, right, there was no way in the congestion control modular to find this information. So that's why it's an external mechanism to handle instantaneous sort of additional bursts of traffic. Yeah. Kind of the discrepancy between what the video encoder produces and what we want to send over the network. Was that clear? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah. Cool. So then the next page, I'll just show up the text on the security consideration. Next slide. Yes. So this one maybe I'll briefly mention, and of course, people are welcome to read it. It's the same text now in the draft, as well as I quoted the same text in the email. So there are sort of two maybe aspects of security consideration. The first one is to say that because everything is feedback based, so we do want the feedback message to be integrity checked. There is kind of the potential vulnerability to attacks based on feedback messages. Now, secondly, is kind of inspired by Mira's comment to say that this mechanism of the rate shaping buffer potentially is can hoard up large chunks of data if the encoder is not a responsive one. And our current mitigation in the draft is to limit its impact on the on the outgoing traffic. So in the worst case, the video itself will suffer, but the traffic over the network will still be congestion controlled. So if people have suggestions or notes on the text in this section, feel free to either mention it here or discuss further on the mailing list. And so if that is fine, maybe we can move on. So these are some of the results just showing kind of the before and after in introducing the influence of the rate shaping buffer. These are simulation results from the NS3 simulation. The ones on the left should be identical to what we've shown earlier. And then the ones on the right are using this basically adding the influence of the rate shaping buffer by tuning up the scaling parameter from 0 to 0.1. And I picked I think I picked 3 out of the test cases to show in this section, and then there are a few more in the very end, just because qualitatively we see very similar behavior, except that the one on the right, because of the slight change modifications of the rate added by the rate shaping buffer, there's a little bit of a jitter. So this is the first test case with a single flow. Next page, please. This one shows the competition of 2 flows over time varying bandwidth. And it's also interesting to see that, for instance, in the second case, there's always some randomness in how the traffic is being modulated over to the network. So in the second case, for instance, the one on the right kind of works even a bit better. The delay introduced in that low bandwidth region is slightly lower. Next page. And the other test case I'm showing is for the multiple competing flows with different round trip time over different paths, sharing a bottleneck. And I think I'm also showing next page, please. So the 5.6, this one is the competition against TCP. So I thought these side-by-side simulations can help to characterize the impact of the rate shaping buffer for the parameter value that we pick. The end of this slide deck also includes the remaining 4 test cases for this suit, just for reference. Yeah, but I think maybe in the interest of time, I won't go into them. They show very similar qualitative comparisons. Next page, please. So now for the second half of the presentation, I wanted to give an update on the implementation, both on the implementation status and some evaluation results. And this is, in terms of the NADA implementation, we have rebased all our modifications to the Mozilla Central Nightly branch to a much newer recent, to a much more recent version compared to our last presentation. So with this one, the main difference is that this May version of the Mozilla repo now incorporates also a much more recent version of the WebRTC Mozilla. We did realize that the earlier modifications we did, there were a lot of code changes in WebRTC, so we now rebase it to the newer version. And if people are interested in checking out the code, we have pushed it up, under Sergio's account and also under my account as a development branch. So this link, for instance, if you look into there, you'll be able to see our code if you want. Right now, it's slightly pending some further cleaning up, but the main logic is there. And in terms of the main part of the code change is that in this version of the implementation, what we did is that we switched the use of, originally in WebRTC, there was a delay-based, I think it should be delay-based bandwidth estimation modular, not one OW. Delay-based BWE modular with our own NADA one-way delay-based congestion control. And this is in the congestion control modular within WebRTC. And here, compared to our previous presentation, in this version, we're following the draft more strictly in the sense that we now use relative one-way delay as the congestion signal. So the calculation of the congestion control signal now follows more closely to the draft. I should mention that at this stage, we haven't yet added the influence of packet losses yet. That is sort of pending further investigation. But in terms of using a reacting to delay and using a relative one-way delay as the basic congestion control signal, we're now in sync with the draft. And the reason we're able to do it is that with this version, if we interoperate with an unmodified Chrome or Firefox, they both support the transport feedback, which actually reports on per packet information, including sequence number as well as send and receive timestamp, which turned out to be super convenient for us to gather all the per packet information at the sender. And the URL I poured out here is sort of embedded in the code itself, and that is how the transport CC feedback message is sort of implemented based on. So with that, we can operate with against an unmodified Chrome or Firefox browser, so long as both sides support transport CC. And finally, just for convenience, our implementation, we also use export statistics using similar mechanism as the standard WebRTC logging framework. And that's kind of the main changes in the code in terms of the implementation. We basically implemented our modular and modified some of the switching logic in WebRTC to use the NADA-based bandwidth estimation as opposed to the original delay-based bandwidth estimation. And if that is good, I can maybe explain a bit more on kind of the test setup we have carried out. We follow more or less the same formula in the sense that we set up bidirectional audiovisual cores between a modified Firefox nightly with our NADA, relative one-way delay-based bandwidth estimation against an unmodified Chrome browser. So basically, the blue stream, right, from client A to B will be sort of congestion controlled using the proposed NADA scheme, whereas the reverse green stream from client B to A will be sort of congestion controlled using Chrome. So whatever is the default algorithm there. The reason why we want to do bidirectional and also check out the performance of the reverse direction is mostly just to consider that as a reference. But of course, I do want to call out that the comparison between the blue and the green are not really side-by-side comparisons. Yeah, this is more just for our reference. And most of the other thing we did for our implementation is that we just fixed the screen. So basically, in the browser, you can configure the default resolution. So we set it to 720p, and then also inside the code, we set our Rmax to 3 meg. But then I looked into some of the code in the Mozilla browser. There is a spatial resolution sort of based rate switching that would limit the sending rate to 2.5 megabit per second if at the resolution of 720p, and that is indeed what we observed. And finally, as I mentioned, we do log the statistics of the outgoing flow based on both our calculation itself as well as the per packet sort of information from the feedback message. So from that, we do have kind of per packet information of how the blue stream went. And then also to double check on those results, in Chrome, they conveniently provide graphs of ongoing statistics in both directions. So we also have a few screenshots just to corroborate with whatever we measure locally. And so let's go through a few of the evaluation scenarios and what we measured. Next page, please. So the first scenario is really more a sanity check. So this is more, I have 2 Macs in my home, and I have, sort of a Google Fiber and then, Wi-Fi. So basically, it's a local connection between 2 clients connected through home Wi-Fi. I forgot to mention, I am using the APR.tc that service, but I believe that it's more for setting up the call. Once the call is set up, it doesn't really go through it does not really go through the server. So it's a peer-to-peer call. So for instance, in this first call, it is a local call. What I'm showing here are 3 graphs, and they will stay sort of the semantics will stay the same for the rest of the presentation. The first one shows both the calculated rate by the congestion control modular in blue, as well as the reported kind of the act rate by the receiver based on the per packet information in red. So for instance, once in a while, those big delays do introduce sort of spiked up arrivals at the receiver. So we do see them at, sort of as reported back in red. And as I mentioned before, even though our rate congestion control algorithm, in this case, it's kind of uncongested, specifies the sending rate to be, the reference rate to be 3 megabits per second. The actual sending rate is limited by to 2.5 megabits per second. The middle graph shows the delay information. We report on both the congestion control signal, which is the relative one-way delay in blue, as well as a reference, the round-trip time measurement on a per packet basis in red. And the bottom graph shows the instantaneous packet loss ratio measured over a window of 500 milliseconds, I believe. But then we do a sliding window sort of a report for one data point for every 100 milliseconds. So even though you do see sort of occasional reports on very high instantaneous packet losses coinciding with those big delays, the overall loss ratio, as reported, is only 1.6% throughout this session. So most of the time there are no losses, but when there is, it's very bursty. So and also in this case, because it's a local connection, the baseline RTT is only 5 milliseconds. But then, believe it or not, even in a local session, once in a while, the RTT measurement is the highest RTT is 1.2 seconds. Zahi, you have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Just a clarification question.
Sure, yes.
So you said like your current implementation doesn't react to packet loss.
Yes, right now we're not using that information yet. Yes.
So the high losses will not will impact the congestion control at all. Okay. I just wanted to understand.
Yeah. Because I want to build the implementation one layer at a time. Yeah. Go ahead, Anna. Yeah.
I'm going to start from the floor. So I also had a clarifying question because you have the path characteristics, and there you have the max RTT is 1.2 seconds. And in your delay measurements, you don't have that high value. So is this during a longer time period, or how does path characteristics
that's a great,
respond to the
That's a great clarification. Yeah, I limited the graph to 400 millisecond top just so that we can see, because otherwise, if we show everything in full scale, the blue and the red will be lumped together. That's also why I'm reporting on the 1.2. So a few of those red dots are high up there, but they're hard to, This is more a visualization challenge. Yeah, so
okay.
Thanks for asking that question. Yeah. That's also why I'm always reporting on the maximum RTT seen. Usually they're not even a single data point, there are a few. And then I wanted to show the shape of the delay measurements a bit more clearly. That's why I was limiting the kind of the plotting bound. Yeah. So if folks are good sort of with this graph, we can move forward. And of course, feel free to answer questions. Ask questions, because I'm always happy to chat about how we measure and sort of all kinds of observations. The second, so this from the same experiment shows kind of the view reported by the Chrome. So keep in mind that Chrome is the client B. So when it says it's a receive stream, it really refers to the blue A to B stream, which is controlled by NADA. Whereas when it says, like when it's reporting on any of the send stream statistics, it's the one from B to A. I'll just adding those labels for reference. So as we can see here, the other thing is that the reported rates are in, for some reason, are in bytes per second. So whatever number you see here, if you multiply by 8, it should more or less corroborate with the red curve before for the direction of A to B. Whereas the reverse direction within the NADA modular, we really don't have any visibility into that. So it was good also to just to check on how the reverse flow was doing. I want to mention that here, because of the scale, so the blue stream was operating more or less at 300 kilobytes per second. So that's approximately 2.5 megabits per second, whereas the reverse direction is a little bit lower. It's more at 200 kilobytes per second. So that's more like 1.6. So for some reason, the reverse flow was operating at a lower rate. And that's also reflected on they're operating at a little bit lower, spatial resolution, even though with the same frame rate at 30 frames per second. So this is a local flow, by the way. Yeah, so we are looking at more or less a typical, but sort of probably kind of the best case scenario, more or less. But everything is over Wi-Fi, so there's still spikes of delay. Yeah. And next page, please. So this next one sort of conforms more to a more typical remote call. So this is between me and a colleague in San Jose. So both of us are in Cisco office, but both of us over enterprise Wi-Fi. So enterprise Wi-Fi, and then sort of kind of enterprise grade wired connections right behind that. So here again, maybe what I want to point out is that overall the path is uncongested. There is, sort of the target rate at 3 and the actual sending rate most of the time at 2.5. We do see that in this case, the baseline RTT is reported at 60 milliseconds. So that's why in this scale of the graph, we do see that there's kind of a floor of the RTT measurements, whereas with relative one-way delay as the congestion signal, most of the time we're still measuring sort of close to 0. So that's why the sending rate is able to sustain at the maximum possible, and occasional packet losses, but occasional burst of packets, maybe I should put it that way. And I'm reporting on both the highest RTT measured is actually 2.5 seconds, and the overall loss ratio remains fairly low, 2.2 over this duration of 450 seconds. So next page. So in this scenario, I'm showing again kind of the reported rate on both directions from the Chrome sort of Chrome reported statistics, the corresponding frame resolution as well as the frames per second. So in this case, number-wise, both of the streams reach around 300 kilobytes per second at the maximum rate. But maybe one thing I do want to point out here is that apparently the NADA control stream is able to ramp up much faster compared to the Chrome default behavior. And also in the middle, there was the Chromes, or maybe there was a glitch, and it took it like somewhat longer to recover. Whereas in the NADA stream, the recovery typically is very fast. So one statistic that I didn't get room to point out, but I want to mention is that in NADA, we have designed the rate adaptation to operate in 2 modes. One is gradual rate update. The other one is accelerated ramp up. Initially, we wanted the accelerated ramp up mode to help the initial start rate, but turns out it's being invoked very often also in all those recovery modes. So that turned out to be the main kind of one feature that really helped. If folks are good with this one, I can move on to a second case between Austin and San Jose. And so this one, the main difference is that, again, this is between the 2 locations, but in this case, client B is behind a home Wi-Fi network. So we see much noisier delay measurements And in this case also, even though physically it's similar location, much higher baseline RTT. Just maybe for reference, the previous setup between the two offices, it was 60 milliseconds. Here, even though the sender is at the same location, just because receiver was behind a home Wi-Fi behind cable modem, the baseline RTT is now 110 milliseconds. And the high delay and the sort of the corresponding burst of packet losses are much more frequent within similar duration. But other than that, the sending rate, right, the calculated NADA sending rate do dip very frequently too, but it also bounce back to the maximum rate whenever it can. Next page. And this is the corresponding rate, resolution, and frame rate statistics reported by Chrome. So the top three graphs correspond to what we sort of measured for the blue stream, for the NADA control stream, and the bottom three graphs shows a reference on the reverse direction. In this case, the reverse direction does suffer quite a bit, so we see sort of fairly low rate and lower resolution, and the frame rate also drops quite a bit. I want to mention that visually, I also have some screenshots, but since it's all people's faces, I wasn't so sure whether to show them here. Of course, at this resolution and frame rates, and also encoding rates, the visual effect were not very good too on the other direction. So, and then moving forward, next page, this is again between Austin and San Jose, and this is a case where we're a bit curious about what happens if you have a background sort of ongoing data downloading flow. So in this case, the client B behind the home Wi-Fi also has an ongoing BitTorrent sort of traffic, and he verified that this is both uplink and downlink, both directions. So in this case, we do see that the flow from A to B now operates at a much lower rate, around 650 kilobits per second. And the other thing I want to mention, but I don't really have an explanation here, is that in this case, we also see that the actual rate is actually the target rate, whereas in previous cases it's the other way around. So for this one, I just want to mention this observation, but it's pending further investigation to find out why. Now, delay-wise, again similar. Baseline RTT of 125 milliseconds. And similar maximum RTT and loss ratio as before. So this mainly shows that in the presence of a persistent background traffic, the video flow itself indeed, only operates at a much lower sort of. This is how it operates right now in the face of a competing flow. Next page. And if you look at both directions, the top graph shows the NADA behavior, the bottom graph shows the Chrome behavior. I do want to mention that here the rate reported by the direction controlled by Chrome operates at even lower rate. The NADA graph is 80 kilobytes per second, whereas for Chrome it's below 20 kilobytes. So looks like the Chrome flow suffers even more in the presence of the background traffic. Yeah, and that shows up on both the frame rate and the resolution choices too. So I have two more experiments to go over. And now in this case, I was working with another colleague, and this is the call over an even longer distance across the Atlantic, because we really wanted to stretch kind of the past RTT, and these type of remote calls can sustain. So this one is between Austin, Texas, and Lausanne in Switzerland. And we tested 2 cases. In this first case, the client B is wiredly connected. So the only wireless hop is between my laptop, in the local enterprise Wi-Fi network. So that maybe compared to previous graphs, now the path is much cleaner. There are still occasional RTTs and even a big one, but overall we see even lower losses and more stable both the calculated rate and the actual rate. I should mention that in this case, the baseline RTT is 180 milliseconds. That's very high. So honestly, I was happy that the scheme didn't break. It sort of still worked very well. Next page. And this one shows the corresponding screenshot view, both for both directions. I guess by now you guys are very familiar on what to look for in these graphs. So both the sending rate as well as the frame the temporal rate, of the frames. I do want to point out that in this case, for instance, the reverse direction, this is quite typical of Chrome. It typically takes them a bit longer time to ramp up on the max rate, even if the path is good. And one final set of experiments. This is again between Austin and the Switzerland office. And this Switzerland office, the Wi-Fi connection happens to be very choppy. So even when we were on, let's say, occasional calls over WebEx, etc., sometimes even the audio itself gets largely delayed. So instead of using the wired connection for client B, in this case, we switch back to enterprise Wi-Fi, and we see a similar behavior, kind of similar as the previous case with the home connection. So those big jumps of spikes of delay introduce brief drops in the calculated rate, but our rate calculation our target rate bounced back fairly quickly, and the corresponding delay and burst of loss. Sorry, I forgot to put the loss ratio number in this one. I should look up the number and feed that in. That was a glitch. But I should mention it should be similar to the previous wireless, around 1 or 2% probably. Next one. And this one, we didn't capture the corresponding resolution and frame rate information. One thing I should mention is that throughout our case, I guess because we have specified the default resolution in the NADA-controlled stream in Firefox, the resolution is always at 720p. So rate changes show up in frame rate changes, whereas in Chrome, they do adapt both the frame rate as well as the spatial resolution. So here there's a difference in scale, but if you peel that off, we're really looking at sort of 300K as kind of the main operating point for both of the flows. And the thing is, the reverse flow, at one point, maybe the spiking delay introduced a dip in the rate, and it took that stream sort of longer time to recover. I think this should be the last slide in terms of experimental results. So next slide is more a summary of our observations. So far, I think we kind of tried, we tried 3 different combinations. The local session is a very easy one. The other 2 are really what we think as typical remote call situations. In these cases, typically we do have sufficient bandwidth, but then because of the presence of the wireless link, we do see that there are occasional delay spikes. So our observation of the NADA-controlled flow is that it tends to ramp up fairly fast to the maximum allowed rate, that's within a few seconds. And also, the sending rate will react to occasional big delay spikes, but it recovers very quickly thanks to the other mode of operation, the accelerated ramp mode operation. We have examined how frequently the modes switch. So we do see that the switching between the accelerated ramp up and the gradual update ramp up modes are fairly frequent, and these are typically induced by those frequent delay spikes, and also just because we have a very stringent sort of criteria for the flow to operate in accelerated ramp-up mode. Yeah, and finally, maybe kind of the reassuring part is that we have tested these cores with past baseline RTTs up to 100 milliseconds, and we see that the flows seem to operate in very, in a very stable mechanism, even though and 180 milliseconds is just the baseline. The occasional RTTs can be on the order of several seconds. So that was fairly reassuring to know. And finally, maybe for further investigations, we're more interested in looking into performance where there is a bandwidth limited connections. We're scratching our head a little bit in terms of what type of typical usage scenario that would relate to. So if the audience have any suggestions, we'd like to hear those as well. And then finally, sort of the study of coexistence with TCP-like background traffic are also of interest. I have a question from the audience. Go ahead.
Sure, from Tencent. So I think it's better to show a third graph on all the scenarios to show that crumb to crumb, because all the data, the reverse data could be because of the reverse path taking a different path, and then the delay is going to be different. So it's better to show like crumb to crumb from different scenarios. Then you will see if the nada from nada to crumb might be better.
Can you explain a little bit more about?
All your testing scenario is from nada to crumb, right? There's no data. There's no testing from crumb to crumb between different locations.
Yeah, but the reverse direction is unmodified, if I may say so.
But I understand about from the two different continentals, and the reverse path would be different most of the time.
Yes, this I agree. Yes.
Yeah. So that's all I'm saying. That if you show three different graphics from nada to crumb and crumb to crumb, then that might be showing more gains instead of just.
Okay. So are you saying, for instance, for the scenario, we do one round with nada to Chrome, and then another round switch the sender to Chrome? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I'm saying. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jonathan, in terms of figuring out what to use for your typical for your bandwidth limited case, I mean, I'm sort of spitballing here, but it might be if you could find somebody who's got cheap home connection like DSL or something, that might be a useful case. I think that's probably the where somebody has you'd have to find a colleague who's lives somewhere remote, lives somewhere rural, or doesn't feel like spending a lot for home bandwidth, which can be hard for, engineering colleagues, I understand. But
right.
Yeah, but I think that feels like that might be somebody with, just lives out in the woods and all they can get is DSL or something like that.
Okay.
Another thing to try, but I guess this probably has a lot of other complexity, might be mobile data, but that might have a whole lot of other complexity to it too. So.
Right.
Anna Brenström from the floor. So in terms of comparing the two, maybe you can also run them in parallel so that you would have one call with NADA and one call with Chrome in the same direction at the same time.
Okay, so that would,
if you do it after each other, the path, the conditions will also not be exactly the same at the 2 points in time. They may be more similar than going in different directions, but still the Wi-Fi over time and the path over time may change.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
Niels Omer, I actually learned at the hackathon last weekend that there's a nice command line tool for limiting your bandwidth. It's called Comcast. So
Okay. Yeah.
Comcast, yeah, like your not so great internet provider in the US, or I don't know. I'm guessing that's what the naming is coming from. But it allows you to basically set on the command line bandwidth limitations for given ports and protocols and so on. So maybe that's like something to explore.
Okay. Thank you.
It works on OS X and Linux.
Okay, thank you. I think we can definitely try with artificially limiting the bandwidth and see what we want. But maybe the other side, and actually early on in some of the testbed evaluations, we did some of those too. But maybe we'll try those as well. But I think we're really trying to hunt for typical scenarios where the bandwidth is limited, just more like a real world type of test. So yeah, I think we'll pursue both. Sort of both methods. Yeah. And the suggestion earlier, there was one on mobile connections. That's definitely something we're curious in seeing how things work. Yeah. But we haven't really tried the mobile version of the browsers to carry out calls. Yeah. So. Thank you. I think this is my last slide. So I'm happy to answer more questions or, sort of.
Okay. Thank you, Yashing. Do we have any more questions before we come? No, seems not. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
So we move on, and Colin, you are next.
Just be a rock star. The batteries are dead.
All right. Hi, I'm Colin Perkins. I can now actually see my slides, which may help. So I want to talk about the RTP congestion control feedback draft. I feel I should be looking at the rest of the room, but then I can't see the slides at all. So yeah, this will do. This will do. This will do. This will do. So the congestion control feedback draft is obviously something we've been discussing for a while. We got a bunch of feedback based on the hackathons at the last few meetings, most recently in the Prague meeting, and we submitted the 04 draft to reflect the implementation experience from the hackathon. Lots of changes in the draft. Well, a few changes in the draft. No changes to the packet format. Everything is clarifications. And we discussed these in AVT Core earlier in the week. Most of the clarifications are around signaling, which I don't propose to discuss here again, but there's or about the precise details of what you report on when and how you split RTCP packets up and that sort of thing. There's two changes I wanted to highlight for this working group. One is about the feedback on FEC and retransmission packets, and one is the response to lost feedback. So in the first subject, the thing we've added to the draft this time is a statement that if you are sending separate RTP streams that contain either forward error correction or retransmission packets with their own SSRC, then when you're sending congestion feedback, you also send the congestion feedback reports on those streams. So you send congestion feedback on the FEC traffic and on the retransmission traffic, on the basis that this is taking up bandwidth and potentially causing congestion. So you should report on it. The second change was to add a section talking about congestion response when congestion control feedback packets are lost. And this says two things. Firstly, it points out that like all TCP packets, it's possible that congestion control feedback packets are lost, and any RTP congestion control algorithm must specify what it does in response to the fact that feedback is being lost. It can't just assume that feedback will be delivered reliably. It then suggests that if you just get an isolated feedback packet loss, then probably the right thing to do is assume that the congestion remains at about the same level it was before. But if a significant number of feedback packets are being lost, you should fairly rapidly reduce the sending rate down towards 0, on the assumption that if all the feedback is being lost, then it's likely that something significant has failed on the path. And it points out that the circuit breaker RFC provides some further guidance here and suggests when you should stop sending entirely. And does the other microphone? Yes, it does. Okay. And those are the main changes. There are two very hopefully minor open issues with the draft. The first is that we have yet to add a comparison with the Holmer draft to explain the design rationale, costs and benefits, and so on. And also to add, it has previously been suggested that we add some discussion of how you convert between the per SSRC sequence numbers as proposed in this draft and the unified sequence number space in the other draft, and talk about what are the trade-offs between the two approaches. These are fairly straightforward in that the per SSRC sequence numbers let you do per SSRC congestion control if you want to do something different for the audio and video, for example, much more easily than having a unified sequence number space. But at the expense of having a slight increase in complexity. Also a slight reduction in bandwidth because you don't have the header extensions with the unified sequence number space. So the trade-off's pretty clear. That's all I have. Hopefully we will address these. The plan is to address these over the summer, and then hopefully this should be ready to go for working group last call before the Singapore meeting, and hopefully significantly before. And that's all I have. Any comments or questions?
Jahid, the comparison with the Holman draft.
Yes.
I mean, as far as I remember, leading the design team, there are some comparisons we have done, and we have compared the results. Like, well, what are the compression, or what kind of benefit or cost we get, or overhead we get? But I'm still like, I have a hard time digesting like why we need this comparison in this draft.
Well, it was, well, I mean, at a previous meeting, we were asked to provide such a comparison. So I have no particular desire to do it, but it was one of the things we were asked to do at a previous meeting of
at
AVT
Core. At AVT Core.
Of AVT Core, yeah.
And what benefit it brings to the CC feedback draft?
None whatsoever, as far as I can tell.
So why are you doing
I mean, it just positions it and makes it clear why you would implement it, and
I mean,
what are the
my rationale is like,
trade-offs.
yeah, I mean, we in the design team we did the calculation, and we saw like, yeah, there could be a better. I mean, there could be another way of doing the signaling, and we agreed to this working group will do that, and this is what our output, right? And then if somebody thinks like, okay, they have a better kind of feedback and they don't want to really comply with standardization, because now then we have other, like NARA has their own condition feedback, Scream has their own condition feedback. Shall we be comparing all of them? If we are not comparing all of them, then why we are picking up this one? And I actually really hard time understanding why we need to do that at all.
Well, as I say, the reason it's on the to-do list is because one of the outcomes of a previous AVT meeting was that we would add a comparison.
Okay, the chairs there.
Well, I'm not, I mean, John, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the group said, but I mean, my argument for it would be because the Holmer draft is actually widely deployed, and if you need to convince people to switch from that to something standard, you have to show them, no, this isn't going to hurt you, and in fact, hopefully will help you.
Yes. Yes. And I think this is a pretty straightforward thing to do, and it will be a very short amount of text.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, basically, the extremely aggressive, various RLE encodings and whatnot in Homer don't actually help you that much in the normal case where you're just reporting on a few packets. So this isn't going to be, some huge explosion in your feedback despite the much simpler packet format, for instance.
yes. Yeah. And I'm not sure I would even go so far as to have a comparison of the bandwidth costs in this. I think the main advantage of this is that it provides per SSRC feedback, which gives you flexibility to do differential congestion control for the different sources. And this one here, whereas the Halma draft, because it gives you a single sequence number space, doesn't allow you to do that.
I honestly don't think so, because the conversion you're describing here between per SSRC and unified sequence numbers can run either direction. It doesn't actually.
It's difficult to do if you don't know which.
You always know you're the sender.
Yeah, okay, I suppose you do.
But no, I think the big advantage is not having the header extension, especially as I think I'm pretty sure that gradually, in most cases, you'll actually get all header extensions out of your average WebRTC video packet, which is actually losing the generic header extension overhead is actually a fairly large win, as opposed to just the.
There is a win here. Yeah,
I think that's the bigger win, is losing the per packet header extension overhead.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can propose some text separately to the list, and we can discuss whether it makes sense to put it in. Propose text on the comparison with the Halma draft, and then we can have a discussion about whether it makes sense to go in.
Okay, thank you, Colin. And the plan is to do the working group last call in both, send it on both lists, I guess, or? Yeah.
Yeah. So that for the recording, that was Jonathan saying yes, it would be done in both groups. Yeah.
And then.
Jonathan, what Colin said in AVT Core is that he hopes to get all of this done before his students come back for the fall semester, because then he doesn't have time anymore. So
that is the hope. Yes,
that is the hope. So basically, our hope is before the end of the summer, we will get the new draft with all this requested text, and then we'll be able to do working group last call, which indeed we will make sure to send to both AVT Core and RMCAT.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good. And then I guess, Colin, once this draft goes through, then you will update the RMCAT draft.
Yeah, right. The RMCAT draft
stable.
is pretty straightforward to update. It's just plugging in the appropriate packet sizes and rerunning the analysis. And that then we can have a discussion as to whether that is describing what we want it to describe. But it's very easy to bring it up to date.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, this was the last item on the agenda, unless anyone has anything they want to bring up for discussion. So thank you all very much for attending, despite being late on Thursday afternoon.
It's better than Friday.
This is the room with the windows. You get some natural light.
Yeah. And very good temperature as well. So it's a good spot. Okay, thank you all. Let's conclude. Did everyone sign the blue sheet? Where is it? Okay. Perfect, thanks.
Meeting a year ago, this is the one that the car went out, so we're very lucky to have.
Right. It's been a while.
Yeah.